Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and alongside me, as always, is Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Yeah, I think it's the last day in Chicago today before flying on to Atlanta for the final leg tomorrow. As these tours always do, they always go very very quickly. But I think we've had I've had 10 nights in Chicago. This is the 10th night overall, so it's been quite a while in one base. But it's certainly a great city to be based for such a long period of time.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk about what happened in Chicago the other night very shortly, but first we will just offer a shout out to our new podcast sponsor, Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN that is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use our code Manchester at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go to our description box. So, Samuel, moving on to the football, talking about that. As we mentioned just there, in Chicago the other evening, United beating Bournemouth 4-1. Another really uplifting, encouraging pre-season performance from United, I thought. Really impressive in many aspects. And just a generally positive mood heading into the season at the moment, isn't there?
There certainly is. And although these games are meaningless, if you're a player, if you're a staff member, you want to win them. I was speaking to someone from Everton who just said how the mood was starting to get a bit flatter because of the results that they've had on pre-season, that they were quite comprehensively beaten by Bournemouth and New Jersey. They lost again the other night. It was slightly surreal because in the press box, as we were watching United and Bournemouth warm up, you could hear the audio from David Moyes' press conference about 5 or 6 floors down on the ground floor, and he sounded very downbeat and frustrated because, as everyone knows, Everton have got a thin squad, and he's becoming very frustrated with the lack of signings, and they've got an awful lot of business to do. So there's an air of pessimism around Everton. With United, it's the polar opposite. And look, nobody in that camp is getting remotely carried away. Speaking to the people, they don't want to fuel expectations on the back of a couple of pre-season friendlies, and understandably so. But it is a genuinely happy camp. It's probably, in terms of being on tours and gauging the mood and things heading in the right direction, it feels strangely akin to 2017. And that was a tour where United had ended the previous season by winning the Europa League final. And of course, on this occasion, they lost the Europa League final. They lost it in a really bad way, given their performance that night. But I maintain, I think it was probably a blessing in disguise they didn't win anything last season. I think it really would have, I think some people would have got away with it, to put it mildly. And it probably needed them to really properly bottom out. And with the number of defeats they had and where they finished in the table, and that result against Tottenham of all teams in the final, they kind of did it. The only way it could have got worse is if they'd got relegated. And so I think that has, if anything, reinforced the focus. And with these games they're playing, it's a minor detail that so far all of their pre-season games, and this will continue on Sunday against Everton, they've been against Premier League teams. I think that's, in a strange way, it has also reinforced the focus, because they're going into a season where they're not going to have any European football. Of course, they've got Fiorentina to come next week. I suspect that's partly been arranged because it's David De Gea's long overdue formal farewell after playing for the club for 12 years. So that's, and he deserves that as well. But it's also that they're always going to have to play another friendly before the season starts, that they're not that undercooked. And there will be some players who haven't played in pre-season yet who will play in that game as well. But they're treating these games really seriously. I mean, it is the Premier League Summer Series, and they are treating them like Premier League games. I think the watchability, if you can call it, of these games has been a lot higher than most pre-season friendlies. The Leeds one was so dreadful. As I've joked before, I always seem to get away with, or ensure that I don't do the the Scandinavian friendly and end up watching it on MUTV and assisting with the coverage while we have a man at the ground. But to be honest, I really don't miss having a night or two in Scandinavia to watch those games, because those games are consistently dreadful. Even when they beat Leeds a couple of years ago 2-0, it was with an academy team in the second half, and you knew the majority of those academy players who came on were not going to cut it for Manchester United, however idealistic some academy anorex out there may be. But watching them on this pre-season here, in both games, the starters have played more than an hour. It was 65 minutes in New Jersey. It was up to 70 minutes on Wednesday evening in Chicago. The last time a starting side in an opening tour game for United played more than an hour, the majority of the starters was in 2018 in Phoenix against Club America. And that was not a tour where you looked at United and you thought they're really fit. That was a tour. That was a tour de farce, really. And Jose Mourinho was in a surly mood from the start, and he was bristling at the fact that his squad was teeming with players that were relegated with the under-21s the previous season. It was a shadow squad because the World Cup had just taken place, and he was pining for players to come back as quickly as possible after World Cup duty. And some of them did cut their holidays short as well to help out and try and lift the clouds that were starting to gather over United. And in the end, they weren't able to. We know how it went for Mourinho. But I remember on that tour going to Barry University in Miami and taking filming a video of them doing a keep ball session, not really thinking anything of it. And then all of a sudden it gained a hell of a lot of traction, because watching it back, the keep ball, people, hipsters call them rondos, it was pitiful. The ability or inability to keep ball, the pace, the lethargy, even the weather. It wasn't that sunny. It's a tropical time of year in Miami in late July, and it almost just everything about it. Even the training kit wasn't that great either. You look at everything about it, you think none of this is good whatsoever. And on this tour, there's been a lot of good, and it's a very happy camp. It's very harmonious. Amorim absolutely made the right decision, leaving the bomb squad behind. As of I think we touched upon it on a previous podcast. There've been previous tours where they've been saddled with players who don't want to be there. Lukaku and Pogba in 2019 was an example that comes to mind. Anthony Martial in 2018 as well. Jadon Sancho last year, and that decision really didn't help Erik ten Hag whatsoever. It undermined him, because there he was having to accommodate a player who had publicly accused him of lying and never actually apologised to him. But Amorim has been empowered and emboldened to cut these players adrift, and it's absolutely in the squad's interests and in the club's interest as well. And it's got the backing of the players. I'm sure everyone's seen the quotes from Diogo Dalot and Luke Shaw after we spoke to them in the week, and just how much backing they're giving Amorim for that. And yes, those players, they're on tour, they're bound to back a manager in that position, and it's understandable. But Luke Shaw isn't just. He's a very raw talker, and he's a very good talker, and he doesn't do it for show. He doesn't do it to get brownie points because he's always injured. What he says is genuinely what he believes at that point. And Diogo Dalot is a very nice lad, but almost always not particularly quotable. It's been very good value speaking about if you're not going to meet the standards, there's no point. You shouldn't be at Manchester United. So I don't think they're missing their teammates. And you look at the makeup of some of those players, and certainly there's a big Latino contingent at United. Anthony and Garnacho, Latino players, and there've been some quite close bonds in the squad in recent years that contingent have formed. But any loyalty, or I hesitate to say loyalty, because I'm sure that there are still friendships there that exist, but on a professional basis, these players out here are being very professional, and they know, because they're part of the squad, almost all of them will be part of the squad when the transfer window closes, as far as the senior players are concerned, the senior personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key takeaway that I take from your points there, Samuel, is just how watchable these two friendlies in the US so far have been. I must admit, I've really enjoyed what I've seen of this United team in these two games. They've moved the ball with such fluidity, a good pace, and just a generally really good standard that they've set. And there's been some particularly eye-catching individual performances. And as I've said in a few written pieces in the last week or so, there's plenty of caveats to apply in pre-season, but everything seems to be falling into place quite nicely. I thought Patrick Dorgu was particularly impressive the other evening, getting a goal and an assist. But there just seems to be a general understanding of what Ruben Amorim wants from his players. They seem to have really taken on board what he's been detailing to them on the training ground.
Yeah, there's a big piece on the site today that I've done on essentially just what the changes he's making to try and make them a force again, make them better, trying to get the players essentially get the players to crack his system. And certainly watching them in these couple of games, they look a hell of a lot more at ease in the 3-4-2-1, but they are playing in friendlies. So you have to temper it, of course. And I think West Ham certainly didn't look at their fittest in New Jersey. The one was a lot more encouraging for a number of reasons. One of them was that United won quite handsomely without either of their new signings being in the squad, never mind on the pitch. And secondly, it was their chance conversion rate. When it flashed up on the big screen at Soldier Field afterwards, it had the stats breakdown. And I think it listed 6 attempts on target from United. And of course, they scored 4 goals. So that's unheard of for them, particularly given their issues in front of goal last season. But referring back to that piece, it does outline these tactical walkthroughs that Amorim does. And I'd noticed it in Getty that some of the pictures from the club photographers are quite, they're not action shots. You don't see footballs in many of them. And it's often from sessions that we've been invited to for a brief period. And that's because the tactical training sessions, the only lenses on them are from the analysts' drones. The club media are not permitted entry to watch them. So there are no photographers in for them. There are no camera recorders in for them either. And Dallo, we asked him about the situation there, and he was going through, Amorim gives players individually 2 or 3 instructions, but he doesn't want to overload them with information, and he trusts them to make a sensible decision when they're on the pitch as well. So I think he seems to be mastering that good balance of coaching these players to within an inch of their lives, but not being dogmatic about it. Louis van Gaal would admonish a player if he had a shot first time, if he didn't take a touch. If you remember, you may remember, George. I mean, you've got a hell of a memory as well. But the first game of United's 2015-16 season, the ball comes across, and Wayne Rooney could he could have a tap in, really, for a player of his ability, but he takes the first touch. It's a heavy first touch, and Kyle Walker is running in to try and challenge him, and in the end, it makes contact with the ball and it goes in for an own goal. Now, Rooney was pretty dreadful at that time in his career, so you've got to take that into account as well. Him having a heavy touch was not a shock back in August 2015. We'd seen that for quite some time, and he was on the downward spiral at United by that point. But it did give you an idea of how programmed the players had become playing under Van Gaal. And then Mourinho said he had to almost deprogram the players because of how dogmatic Van Gaal was about it. I remember Morgan Schneiderlin saying after he joined Everton, he felt like a robot because of what Van Gaal wanted him to do. And with Amorim, I think you look at that 3-4-2-1 system. Last season, clearly, in the majority of games, United looked so rigid because here comes a new manager. It's a markedly different system, and I think there was an element of stage fright as well there, that players were frightened of making a mistake, so they'd err on the side of caution. And Dorgu is a good example of that he was quite sheepish with his performances. Didn't get an assist, didn't get a goal, I don't think. Had 1 or 2 good games or very good games. Sociedad in the second leg in the Europa League knockout stage springs to mind. But watching him now, he is playing like a pure winger, and he joined the club as a left back. And you have to cut him slack because he joined the club as a left back and he went into a team that literally could not string 2 league wins together. So he's bound to struggle, particularly playing in a role where you've got to play as a winger. I know people still refer to them as wing backs. They're not. They are wingers. They are in that team to serve as the striker. And Dorgu on this tour, and also I thought in the second half against Leeds, he was very bright and he is playing like a pure winger. And the challenge is very obvious. It is to transmit that form to the competitive season when that gets underway later on this month. So, and just touch on a little bit more with Amorim in terms of the balance he's getting. He is obviously, he's a big on discipline, but he's probably a little bit softer than Ten Hag. That's not to say that he's a soft touch. It's just that Ten Hag was really, really big on discipline. There was an interesting story that is mentioned in the piece, quite a funny story, that on his first tour in Bangkok, obviously that was the tour where Alejandro Garnacho was late for a team meeting, didn't get a kick on tour whatsoever. And his dim view of tardy timekeeping really did kind of like petrify the players to the point that the lifts in the team hotel, I think it's called the Athena Hotel in Bangkok, were really slow. So the players started to take the stairs and climb 40 flights of stairs just to make a team meal on time. So the stairwell was becoming congested with Manchester United players, which if you were staying in the Athena would have been quite the sight to behold. And that was the instant impacts that Ten Hag had. And do you know what? That squad needed it after 5 or 6 months under Ralf Rangnick, who was only there on an interim basis and was never going to have complete authority. And before him, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was a soft touch. So they probably did need that. But then when results go against you, that hardline approach, you're maybe going to have to compromise it. But if you start to compromise it as a manager, you're probably a dead man walking at that point. So that's the perils of management. But Amorim, with the players, I think it's breakfast from 7:30 a.m, but they don't have to be there for 7:30 a.m. They've got to be on the bus by 9:15 to leave for training from the Waldorf Astoria, which is where they've been staying in Chicago. And then after a bit of gym work at the Chicago Fire's impeccable training centre, it's onto the grass for 10:30. And we've not heard any tells of issues or lateness there so far. I think it is just an obedient and happy camp that are absolutely determined to do well this season, and so far so good as far as their pre-season is concerned.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? And obviously players, when they speak to yourself, Samuel, or other journalists out there, they're never going to criticise the manager's methods in public, but there has been genuine praise for Ruben Amorim from this group of players. They clearly are believing in what he wants to try and achieve. And I think that is translating to the pitch in the performances that we've seen. And it does feel like there's just something different in the air heading into this coming season, doesn't it?
Yeah, as I've outlined there, it is genuinely a happy camp. Sometimes you can sense if something's not quite right. Last season, last pre-season, it wasn't quite right because Erik Ten Hag was still in charge, and there were people at the club who were very close to him and very defensive of him, who absolutely acknowledged that he should have gone after the FA Cup final. And I said that at the time, maintained that all along. But a lot of fans have a lot of accountability for that one, because they effectively caused the club to keep a manager, and in the end it inflicted the worst season in 51 years on them. So again, in a way, it's a show of fan power, but it was a bad form of fan power. A good form of fan power was get United to withdraw from the Super League, or abandon plans to reintegrate Mason Greenwood. But keeping Ten Hag was not such a or certainly voicing support for Ten Hag, I thought was remiss of them. And in 2023, it just was not quite right with all the travelling. That schedule was mad, starting in New Jersey, going to San Diego, going in and out of Houston, ending it in Las Vegas. Just whoever signed off that schedule shouldn't be at the club still. They probably aren't at the club, given the amount of people who've left over the past 12 months. A lot of them unfairly so, and will be losses. But someone thinking that that's an advisable pre-season tour schedule doesn't really understand football. And also, there was something bubbling under the surface on that tour, and that was the Greenwood issue, which, of course, they made an absolute mess of. In 2022, I mean, in terms of tactical training, and when there have been open sessions that we were able to watch in their entirety, that was the best one. In Thailand, we were pitch side. We were practically on the pitch, just the other side of the white line, watching these very sharp exercises and innovative drills that Ten Hag was overseeing, which the players were clearly buying into. And United did look good on that tour, and things were looking quite promising. And then Brighton rock up at Old Trafford, and Moises Caicedo turns it on, and Brighton do what they often do to United. They beat them. And then a week later, it was absolutely still the worst performance I've ever seen from a Manchester United side. And that was after a genuinely promising pre-season. And that's why the people at the club, they're not going to make a big song and dance about what's going on at the moment, because the proof is always in the pudding. I know it's a dreadful cliche, but that's the way you have to operate. And the acid test will be against Arsenal in just over 2 weeks' time. But all you can do on a pre-season is try and be as fit as possible. And they genuinely do look fitter than ever. And the players were given individual programs in the close season. They came back and went through tests, tantamount to bleep tests, I suppose, like we used to have at school. And the sports scientists were really impressed by the numbers. And I think you can see that from the intensity that they're playing at. Dorgu is a very good example of that. There was some gallows humour in the press box the other night because, of course, Cunha sat out the game against Bournemouth due to fatigue. And, of course, he was the player who walked more than anyone else in the Premier League last season. He's now playing under a manager who demands the players run like dogs, and there he is, fatigued after a couple of games. But he is due, in all seriousness, he is due to play against Everton in Atlanta. But it is a measure, I suppose, of how hard the players are being worked, and Mbeumo's being worked really hard as well, where he's playing catch up, having started pre-season later because Brentford reported for training a week later than United did. As far as we're aware, Mbeumo didn't do any team training that week because he wanted to leave. He wanted to join United in the gym. So he's roughly 2 weeks behind the players who came in on when was it? July the 7th, I think, wasn't it, or something like that. But hopefully, for our sake and his sake, he'll make an appearance against Everton on Sunday. But there are no cutting corners. There's no leniency with players. I think Mbeumo started just about every Premier League game last season for Brentford, so we know how fit he can be. But United aren't taking any chances. They want him at a specific level of fitness before he goes into that team, regardless of how much they paid for him.
Yeah, and understandably so. They're certainly managing the loads very carefully. But just looking back lastly on the Bournemouth game, Simon, before we move on to other matters, we've already mentioned about Patrick Dorgu, how well he played. His fellow countryman, I thought Rasmus Højlund, obviously the headline act was his early goal, but another good performance from him. I thought he led the line quite well. He connected the play quite well, which was what Ruben Amorim praised him for after the game. And at the other end of the pitch, Lenny Yoro with another really commanding performance and showing what he can do on the ball. So there's a lot of individuals that are really stepping up to the plate on this tour.
Which is always a good sign. If the team are playing collectively, there are going to be good subplots that we can write about, we can talk about, which is what we're doing. I thought towards the end of last season, Yoro was really starting to step up, almost literally, in that he's coming out of defence more. He's clearly a very, very good footballer who can supplement attacks, who can spray admirable crossfield passes that are 40 or 50 yards long. I think to a lesser extent, you want Aidan Heaven to do that as well if he starts to find his feet a little bit more, if he starts the season. Just because he's left-footed, he's the other side. Those are the minor adjustments that Amorim has made. De Ligt or Maguire will always play in the middle of the three unless there's a massive injury crisis. And it'll be Heaven or Martinez or Shaw on the left, and it'll be Yoro or Mazraoui on the right. Mazraoui's been injured for all of pre-season so far, so we've not seen any of him, but we saw enough of him last season to know what a good judge he is in defence. And I don't think we'll be seeing him on the wing this season, which is just as well, because that role doesn't suit him. He's definitely got a role in the squad, but I'd be surprised if he started anywhere near as many matches as he did last season, unless, of course, there is another defensive injury crisis, which United have been prone to having in recent years. With Højlund, all he can do is score. And when he came out in the mix zone afterwards, he said, "Oh, does anyone want to talk to me?" And it was difficult to tell whether he was being sarcastic or not, or whether he had a bee in his bonnet, because obviously hours earlier, we all wrote the story that United are advancing with discussions to try and sign Benjamin Šeško, having looked to sign Liam Delap earlier in the summer, having been rejected by Victor Gyökeres, having tried to see whether they could get Ollie Watkins out of Aston Villa. It's abundantly clear that they want a new striker, and Højlund isn't daft. He will know that. So all he can do is try and prove a point as much as possible. And as far as I'm concerned, he got 2 goals. That Ahmad shot deflected in off Højlund, and if that's the case, the goal has to go to Højlund. I don't see what the debate is there, and I think it was pretty clear that the ball grazed his shin as well, and he was quite genuine in trying to make as many people as possible know that he was the one who got the final touch on it as well. The debate with Højlund, really, and it's started to resurface a little bit, even though it's probably in vain, is whether you get rid of him or Xerxes when if or when a striker comes in, because Højlund is an out-and-out striker. As flawed as he is a number 9. Xerxes isn't. He's neither here nor there, and he's played quite well as one of the 2 number 10s. But when we did that Keep or Sell podcast 3 or 4 months ago, I'm pretty sure I said, do you want Joshua Xerxes starting as one of the 2 playmakers in the Manchester United team? Is that going to get you anywhere? No, it isn't. He's a decent footballer. He should never have been bought by Manchester United. Højlund should never have been bought by Manchester United as a starting striker earlier. But you're going to have to keep one. And in some ways, it is more logical to keep Højlund. But Xerxes, this calendar year, his approval ratings have risen steadily. Højlund's have gone in the opposite direction. They were also signed by different regimes as well, which I think counts against Højlund. And the circumstances of his signing, I don't think they... Certainly, I was, even as an objective observer, I was quite uncomfortable with the way United had gone about that. Not just, I mean, something was out of their control with Keys Voss deciding to take over representation of Højlund, but then spending as much as they did, having told us they wouldn't spend more than £60 million, was pretty risible and pretty endemic of how they used to operate, and hopefully they won't operate like that anymore. But I go back to the point that Højlund is actually a striker. Yeah, you look at that dynamic there potentially of Højlund and Šeško as your 2 strikers, and again, I find that quite alarming. Šeško, like Højlund, was born in 2003, played in the Austrian league, and he's got a pretty underwhelming goal scoring record in a Big 5 European league. United would say, if they do sign him, they would say, well, it's a similar profile to Liam Delap. That's the one we wanted at the start of the summer, so that's why we've gone for him. But they were looking at Ollie Watkins, who's 29. They were looking at Victor Gyökeres, who's 26. And I think there are big caveats with Arsenal signing Gyökeres because the Portuguese league is effectively a 3-team league. There's a hell of a lot of fodder to come up against in that top flight. I think it's like ranked as the eighth best European league now as well, which is not a ringing endorsement of the quality in that league. So I think there's every chance that Arsenal could encounter issues with Gyökeres coming into the team. But United were always going to have to make a compromise, because finding a young, proven goalscorer with Premier League experience out there, I don't. Apart from Alexander Isak, they don't exist, and we all know that they're not going to be signing Alexander Isak, which is a wrench for them. But that's their error. They could have signed him at some point, but again, if Isak had ended up at United, would he have developed into the brilliant striker that he has at Newcastle? Probably not, just because of the conditions of signings have gone in at United in the past 4 or 5 years. So it's with Šeško, it's not. He is not a player that I would, if I was, as I said, with Cunha and Mbeumo, I thought absolutely they are players that Manchester United should be signing. I don't think Šeško is a player Manchester United should be signing. He rejected them 3 years ago as well to sign for RB Leipzig. And I know you can. I mean, Alan Shearer rejected United at the start of the 90s, and then they were back in for him, and quite rightly so, when they were trying to get him from Blackburn in 1996. But I think that's the only time I'd ever compare Šeško with Shearer. It's there's not an Alan Shearer out there, that's for certain, in the Premier League. That would have solved United's answers if he actually wanted to come to United. But they're not quite as fortunate.
No, definitely not. But United, to be fair to them, they did acknowledge, didn't they, at the time of registering their interest in Liam Delap, that there wasn't many attainable strikers in the mould that they wanted this summer, and it has been quite a difficult task to find one. But obviously, transfer elements, things can change all the time. We know that, Samuel. But Benjamin Šeško saying it does turn out to be him. He is the number 9 they go for. There's obviously elements of risk attached, which you've mentioned there. But he is quite highly rated. Obviously, Højlund was as well. But Šeško has got a better record than Højlund had at the time of joining the club. But as well as that, you would like to think maybe Mbeumo, Cunha being in the building to support him could sort of ease the pressure a little bit on him, whereas Højlund was expected to come in and be the main man. We both agree he should have been the second choice striker at the time. But with Šeško, if he's got players around him of their ilk, it should be able to help him out, you think?
Well, Højlund touched upon that in the week, in that he practically said, I didn't have any help when I came in. I was pretty much on my own, which he was, because the support striker was Anthony Martial. And if you literally tried to lean on Anthony Martial for support, you'd probably break him, because he was injured that often. He didn't play for United again after December the 9th in that 23-24 season. And we could see that coming as well. That was the problem. If they wanted Højlund, it was, right, are you signing Harry Kane as well? And everyone knew they weren't going to sign 2 strikers for, what would it have been, like 130, 140 million pounds between them, maybe even more if United were genuinely trying to sign Kane. But they lost their nerve, unfortunately, for them that summer. So it's absolutely a valid point that whoever the number 9 is, they've got quite a good support cast around them in Fernandes, Mbeumo, Cunha, Ahmad, Kobbie Mainoo. You would hopefully add Dorgu to that as well if he continues with the form he's in when the competitive season starts. There are other players as well who will be coming in as number 10s. Obviously, Mason Mount, who did decently the other night as well. So you've got to feel like encouraged with that. But when although Højlund didn't have the support of another striker, he did have Antony, he did have Rashford, he did have Garnacho, he did have Fernandes. Mount had just signed as well that summer. Christian Eriksen was coming off a very good season. So you looked at it, and although the issue was that there wasn't another reliable number 9 in terms of the fitness there were options, but it did cause a lot of rancor, that the whole mismanagement of the number 9 that summer, because Rashford, having just had the best season of his career off the left wing, started the season as a striker. I forgot to mention Jadon Sancho, because he was just about still in the fold as well, and he actually played up front during that pre-season in 2023. But Rashford really bristled at the fact that he started the first 2 games of the season up front. And as soon as Martial was fit, I mean, I say fit, he was still the usual statuesque Anthony Martial on the pitch when he did start a couple of games in August. But It was just typical of Marshall. He was injured for months and months and months, and then he gets fit right at the end of the transfer window when you just know that nobody's going to come in for him. He couldn't get fit a month before the window closed, where maybe there'd be a chance to get rid of him. It was always, I'll leave it until now, and then I'll be able to keep. I'll be able to see out my contract for the next year. He's a year now, but that was that. Was annoyed that he started the season as a striker and had a tiff when he got substituted when they lost 2-0 at Tottenham. Sancho, but it rubbed players up the wrong way, and of course Sancho, he's all of a sudden he thinks he's done all right in pre-season, but Marshall's fit, comes straight back into the team. Sancho, just kind of tosses it off. Is bombed out. It isn't in the squad for Arsenal because of his training form, and then it obviously all blew up after I asked Ten Hag that question as to why he wasn't at Arsenal. So that's just you look at that four different players. Højlund being injured at the start, not being able to play in the first few games. Rashford bristling at having to play up front. Marshall coming back in, and a lot of fans being sick of the sight of him really. That he's still there, and then Sancho not starting up front, and that's how not to manage a striker situation. But my concern would be with Šeško, it's that him and Højlund are still two very, very similar profile of players, and I've been very consistent all along that they need someone who is more Premier League proven, is consistent. I was surprised to see that Watkins has not scored 20 Premier League goals in one season, but I think we touched upon it the other day. The starting point at Villa when he came into that team, they just avoided relegation. They've got progressively better and better, and they've had European football to contend with. So he has developed as a striker in that time, and what you see is the finished article. But that's what United need, and I'd be a lot more bullish about their chances if they had Watkins coming in. And yes, he's turning 30 at the end of the year, and United would probably have to be forking out 50 or 60 million pounds for him. And in a way, they are their own worst enemy in that they've signed Cunha for 62.5 million. They've signed Mbumo for 65 million, rising 71 million. There's a reason why they wanted to sign Liam Delap early in the transfer window for a release clause of 30 million pounds. It was convenient. It was too convenient. I didn't agree with them going for Delap, but you've got to be prepared to pay the cost really if the longer you go without signing a striker, and that's probably one element of the window where you can look at it and you think that has been a mistake. As good a player as Mbumo is, and I'm really pleased for United that they've signed him, they should have got a striker in June or July. I think it was it's obviously such a big priority, but often the priority signing is the last one to come through the door, and they've also got sellable assets there that they need to get money for, and Sancho's one of them, and Garnacho and Antony are the other two.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? That none of the big name stars have gone on permanent deals yet. Marcus Rashford, obviously, him being sent out on loan will reduce the wage bill a bit, but in terms of permanent exits, we're still waiting for any of the big name departures. And on that note, we will bring this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show to an end. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. We'll be back again next week to review the clash with Everton and look back on the tour as a whole. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you again very soon.